Stephen Paz, I do honestly consider it an honor that I get to call you my friend, and that we both pick on each other in equal measure. I think he likes it a little bit more than I do to be picked on, but I would love to pray for you this morning, and then I'm going to hand it over to you. Father, I thank you for Stephen. I pray that you would be on him right now in the name of Jesus, that you would bring your anointing, and you would anoint his mind and his heart, that they would be connected today, and that as he goes through Job, Lord, that he would be able to communicate what's on your heart for this class. In Jesus' name, everybody said?
Hallelujah.
We're going to break at 10 minutes.
10? Right at 10. And 11? Wow. Okay. Yes.
Why did you erase the thing on the board?
How do you mean?
Leviathans or dinosaurs.
We'll go over that. Public speaking is not a problem for me, but holding mic, sometimes I hold it too low. Is this good for you guys? Should I hold it higher? Perfect. Great. Okay, I'll hold it right here. So, Job, you guys already read it? It's a confusing book. What's going on with this book? I want to offer you guys something from Ravi Zacharias, and I felt led from the Lord to start this morning and this teaching with this. So I hope it makes sense. If it doesn't, let me know, and we'll just go from there. So the question is, why does God not stop suffering? That's the age-old question. Why doesn't he do it? The supreme ethic God has given to us is love. It's the peak of all emotional and intellectual alignment. This thing that we have and call love. Love places value on people of worth and is something to be protected. Value and love are the supreme ethics that can be treasured. You can never love without intrinsically weaving into it the freedom of the will. You cannot have love without freedom of the will. If compelled by a machine to a certain decision, you can never truly love. You can comply, but will never be able to express that sentiment of love. If love is a supreme ethic, and freedom is indispensable to love, and God's goal for you and me is to love Him with all our hearts and love our neighbor as ourselves, Deuteronomy 6 verses 4 through 6, for Him to violate our free will would be to violate that which is a necessary component for love to flourish and for love to be expressed. If we are always asking God to stop the trigger, why not ask God to stop everything else? When we ask this, we are asking for a different entity than humanity. The greatest denial we are asking for is to ultimately choose to love God with all our hearts. When we have love as a supreme ethic and able to choose that love, all the contingencies come in. So in one little series of episodes, we do not know what comes next. Job is a crazy, crazy book. There's a lot of heartache in this book. There's a lot of tears, and understandably so, in this book. But the thing about Job, the thing that we must understand and grasp, and I hope to touch on, is this right here. Why versus who? And I'm going to explain. I'm not going to explain that now, but I will as the teaching progresses. But why versus who? There are many ways this book can be taught, for sure. But I pray that the teaching that you guys will hear will hit your hearts and hit my heart. And for those of you who have already heard this teaching, may something new from it hit you, and may a different aspect of this teaching hit you. But why is there suffering? Why is there suffering? I hope we can get to the bottom of that question. And I hope you guys will see the beauty and profound revelation that Job really is. But to even before we even jump into the text, and before I even attempt to teach you guys, I must start off with my own family testimony. Because it's very, it's with this book. It's like I can't think of Job without thinking of my family story. So I begin with this chapter of Genesis right here. And in particular, I will need to point out, be fruitful and increase in number. Because my mom and dad, they just loved each other, and I'm one of 7. And it's like, good God, Mom and Dad, you really lived out that verse. So good God, they definitely increased and multiplied us in number. So, for most of my life, there were just myself and my 2 oldest brothers and my younger sister, Christy, and my younger brother, Andrew. The thing with my family is we did grow up in a Christian home. We listened to Brian Duncan, the Chris Tomlin of the 90s. We listened to, I think that's the best way I can describe him. We listened to like Carmen, which is like, wow. Oh my God, like Satan Bite the Dust. Remember that song? That song is legit. But anyways, you know, like, and Salty, the Kids Singing Bible. Do you guys know that? Oh, you know what that is. So it's like, I grew up in a Christian home, but I wouldn't call myself a Christian, if that makes sense. My family had a lot of issues. And this is right here, my brother Daniel. There's me. I ate too much potatoes or whatever I ate. And there's my brother Jesse. And this is Christy. And there's Andrew. There's my mom. And I think I'm looking at a food cart. Is at Disneyland. I don't know what I'm looking at. Funnel cake? I don't know what it is. But anyways, like I grew up with Jesus, but not knowing who he was truly. All this to say. And there was always a lot of fighting with my brothers. I never truly got along with them. I would always fight with my brother Daniel and my brother Jesse. Even then in this picture, I think I'm fighting them. It kind of looks like it. But there was always this fighting. There was always just arguments, and it was nothing good. What that did in me was it instilled in me a lot of hatred for my brothers and just for my family at large. We had our moments of laughter, and we had our moments of watching Matt TV on Saturday night at 11 p.m. and like Will Sasso impersonating Steve Seagal. That was like funny, but like we grew up with all these things, and yet there was this hatred, the seed of hatred that was in my heart for my brothers and just for my family. My dad, I love him now, but just growing up, I just had this deep-seated hatred for him. Suffice it to say, I didn't like my family at all. I would even dare say that there's not an ounce of love in my body for my family truly, other than my grandparents, whom I'm very close with. So as the years progressed, and Daniel gave this part of my teaching away, but God is good. I graduated high school in 2006, and up until that moment, I've never really partied or did anything bad. Though I didn't follow the Lord, I was not outwardly getting drunk or doing drugs or any of those things. But when I graduated high school, I go to community college, and as I hit community college, I get my first job at Ace Hardware, and I have no idea what I'm doing. People is asking me about plumbing. I don't know, like, what you're asking me for. And it's like, dear God, like, I don't know what I'm doing. And yet, my bosses allow me to work there. So I mention that because it was in this time that partying was introduced. It was in this time that I started to drink. It was in this time that I started to do drugs here and there. Now, as I step back and think of that moment of my life, that period of time in my life, if I did not follow the Lord, if I didn't read this book, which I'll explain more in detail in a second, I'm pretty sure I would be stuck in that phase. But I started drink and drive, drugs. I don't know how to dance. I'll get crazy drunk and go to clubs in Hollywood. I'm like, it doesn't matter. People are all drunk here anyways. They can't tell if you can dance or can't dance. So it's just all gravy to me. And I was just like, I don't even know what I was doing. I just like did a shoulder deal. I'm like, okay, you know what I mean? Like, and I had like a beer in my hand. I'm like, shoulder deal. And that's all I did. And it was just so crazy bad. I quit my job in 2010. And by February 1st, 2011, without having any backup plan, without having any semblance of just any direction in my life, I got deeply depressed. And I was just besides myself with just low self-esteem, low self-worth. See, much of my testimony is that I was very, very shy and could not do public speaking. And I could not speak to people on a one-on-one basis. And I could not stand in front of anybody for longer than a second. So it's like crazy that this is who I used to be. But then as Daniel shared when he introduced me, I'm at this low point. I'm feeling like, what am I doing with my life? I don't like my family. 2 years previous from 2011, there was a bad family fight. Cops were called. It wasn't anything pretty. One of my brothers pulled out a knife. Like, it was just bad. But February 1st, I'm sitting I live with my grandparents at the time. I'm sitting on a bed. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, man, what am I doing? My life sucks. So I walk to the master bedroom, my grandmother's room. She doesn't share rooms with my grandpa because I think he farts too much or I don't know what. But I'm just sharing this because vulnerability. But really, so like I go to my grandmother's room and I go to the bathroom. I shouldn't have said that. I apologize. But I splash water on my face. I'm in the bathroom. I'm splashing water on my face. I'm like, good God, what's going on with me? My life sucks. My life absolutely sucks. I have no direction. I have no semblance of anything at all. My life is not good. And I'm going nowhere. And as I'm leaving the bathroom, this book is facing me. And to this day, I asked my grandma, where'd you get this book? She has no idea where she got it. So I don't know if God just miraculously placed it there, or it was just there the whole time my grandma forgot. It could be both. It could be one or the other. But I read this book, and it just changed everything for me. Absolutely everything. I was very salty, very raw in the beginning of my faith. But I just had this call and this desire that I want to be a missionary. I want to go to Kona. I remember reading at the end of the book when the ship is coming in the harbor and all the leaders are crying. They're out there on the pier. And I remember it broke me. I'm like, God, you lost the first ship and you got another ship. It was powerful. I remember that was a moment in the book that just broke me the most because of God's faithfulness. And I became undone. So from this moment, from reading this book, I knew what I wanted to do. And I had no idea what YWAM was. I couldn't even pronounce it right. I said YWAM. I'm like, I don't know how to speak right now. I'm like, who is this Loring Cunningham guy? Who is he? I have no idea who this guy is. So I started researching. I'm like, all right, I'll do a Bible school. So I initially signed up to do SBS first, but I really did. But then the SBS school leader is like, you can't do this school first. It's second level. You need to do DTS. So I'm like, okay, thank you, sir. I will do a DTS. So I started signing up application for Crossroads DTS because I had just picked one. And I'm like, all right, I'll do Crossroads. 25 and older. It's right around my age range. Good God, it's going to be great. But then I didn't do it, and I did Awaken summer of 2012. And it was a powerful, powerful school. Matt Scaff, I love him so much. Erica and Kat Hoban. It's like, these leaders whom I love so much. And I remember just being on fire and just wanting to hit the streets every single night with tracts, telling the people about the Lord, being very abrasive in my approach of evangelism and my apologetic of the faith. But I still did it nonetheless because I just wanted to tell people about the Lord. But one crazy moment in my DTS was after watching Father of Lights, I'm like, I just want to see people get saved if God would allow me. And I called my friends from back home, and in the span of an hour and a half, 3 friends got saved. So I'm like, thank you, God. This is almost too easy and fun, and it became like an addiction, where it's like I want to see people get saved. I haven't got my fix today, so I was always looking for that fix, if you will, to see people get saved, and I loved it. But the most powerful moment of my DTS was serving. My worship duty was serving in an old kitchen. And my worship duty was serving every other weekend, but I love this so much, I'll serve every weekend. Because my thought was, I'm not here for vacation, I'm here to know the Lord. And the best way to know the Lord is to know Him by way of what He did when He was on earth and He served. So it's like, I want to serve. I'll go to the beaches, and it's okay. I would rather be in a kitchen and serve the base. And I loved it. I made lifelong friends, and it was amazing. So, out of all this time, guys, out of all that God has shown me, with serving, with being in my ohana, my awakened ohana, one moment after worship duty, I get a phone call from my mom, and she says that I need to talk with you. I can tell that in her voice it was cracking and it was a little emotional. I'm like, Mom, I'm almost done. We're just watering down the ground or the floor and scrubbing it down. So, leave work duty. I sit in front of building 4 at the time. Now it's building A. I'm sitting in front of it, and my mom asked me a question. And this question absolutely destroyed me because I did not see it coming at all. And it's at this point that I'm going to stop. And it's at this point I'll continue the story at the end of lecture. Because it is interwoven into Job. It is interwoven into this book. This question completely changed everything for me that my mom asked me. And then when I taught this the first time, it just highlighted for me. But nonetheless, let's jump into the story. Why do the righteous suffer? Maybe you guys ask your small group leaders, your reading group leaders, why does Job suffer so innocently? Those are very, 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 very valid questions to ask. What's the deal with chapters 1 through 2? Satan going to God's presence. I thought he got kicked out of heaven. Is God really just to allow Satan to attack Job? Do you guys think of that one as well? Like, why does God allow... Job's innocent. Why would God do that? How about this? This is a good one. Did Job's children warrant the death that occurred on them? Did they do anything in their life that would incite the death that came to them? Why did Job's wife not take the same response as Job, which was seeking God's presence? Is there and this is a very big question that I still have, is there any truth to what Job's friends said? It kind of sounds right. Am I right, guys? Kind of sounds correct. So is there any truth to what they said? And then this question right here, my best friend Nathaniel Peterson said, is Leviathan and Behemoth evidence for dinosaurs? Or is it something else? Because as we will discover, this book is poetic in its expression. So is it really talking about dinosaurs or is it not? Or does that have to do with anything of the story? So suffice it to say, guys, questions are good, and I'm sure you guys have your own questions. They are very valid to have questions. for this book and of this book, for different things within this book. But I strongly believe asking why is not the focus of Job. Why does he suffer? That's not the focus. The main focus I want to offer to you guys, and you are more than welcome to disagree with me, the main focus I believe that this book captures is who. Not why does he suffer, but who will you turn to in the midst of suffering? Who will you seek when the bad times of life happen? Who will you turn to when there's a death in a family? Because when we really take a step back and we ask ourselves, is knowing a why to a crazy catastrophic event, will that do a justice to our hearts? So Job, I propose, is about why versus who. Who is bigger than suffering? And who does Job turn to more than he seeks out the why? So this idea, guys, is made evident right from the beginning of this book, as you guys can tell me and you guys discover. The prologue of this book, chapters 1 through 2. This is very important because in 1 verse 1 we read this. And this is said of Job, blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. Did you guys notice that? And then again we read the same thing in 2 verse 3. So this is important to highlight, guys, because we as readers today, as you guys read it and as you guys continue to read this book, we have insider information. We know something. We know something that the four friends do not know. We know something that Job's wife does not know. And that's chapters 1 through 2. The argument made against Job was the wisdom of the time. And if I'm to be honest and truthful, it's much the wisdom of some today. Their worldview in which the lens in which they saw the world, their mindset was that if bad things happen to a person, that means that person committed a sin. If good things happen to a person, that person was righteous. This wisdom is called the law of retribution or retributive justice. This was the wisdom that shaped the arguments of Job's friends. So the main and simple problem with this mindset is that it has an inward focus of it. The mindset places all value on people rather than God. This mindset places all authority and power in the hands of people, ending with the choices of man dictating who God is. I did good today, Lord. I did my Bible reading today. You must bless me. You must bless me, Lord. At its core, at the crux of the matter, at the center of the matter, this wisdom is pagan in its nature. I would dare argue, and makes gods of people rather than looking at God truly. And so when you guys read, and when we read Job's friends accuse him throughout this book, we actually know they are wrong. They are wrong because remember, guys, we have insider information. We know something his friends don't. We know what was said of Job by God, that he was blameless and upright. Job fearing God and turning away from evil. And so, the scene is set. Enter in this book. We have the Satan entering God's presence. God brings up Job twice. Satan is given permission to attack Job's livelihood, his health, his family. And we have our story. Satan going into God's presence. That's the first event of the book. So Satan going into God's presence can mean many things. One of two things that it means is that it says that the sons of God, that it can mean many things, but the two views, when we look down to it, or when it comes down to it, is that God, like, where was God having this assembly? Did any of you guys have this question? Why does Satan go into God's presence? So what we have is that this first view says that God was having His holy assembly in heaven, and that sons of God just means angels. So Satan came amongst other angels. Another point of view, or option 2 I'll call it, was that God was having His assembly on earth. Perhaps Mount Sinai, that some scholars would say. And that sons of God was just godly men, men with upright standing. But the thing with this prologue, and the thing with this introduction of the book, is the exchange that Satan has with God. In 1 verse 7, Satan says this: from going to and fro on the earth. He says, from going to and fro on the earth. The most important and utterly profound thing to notice about this was that Satan was looking for someone to accuse. And the connecting point that we have in 1 verse 7, it connects with a New Testament book, 1 Peter 5 verse 8. It's kind of like your enemy's like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Satan's character that we already know, but reading Job, his character, the enemy of humanity, looks for those to accuse. And we already know this. He looks for those to consume with death. But that doesn't answer the question, guys. That doesn't answer why did God allow Satan to attack Job. Though it's valid, without a doubt, we would see what the readers of Job would have saw, that God is sovereign. We would see that God has all control over Satan. So the original people who would have read this book wouldn't have saw that as a bad thing for Satan to ask permission, because it shows that Satan is limited in his power. And that God is all powerful, and that God is bigger, God is the boss, God is in charge, and all real power, all real and true power comes from God. And think of it, bless you. You can almost think of Job's test as a privilege. Because what does God say? God says, have you considered Job? It seems God is holding up Job as an example. Have you considered this man? But we must move on. And we must move on to 1 verse 7 through 8. Satan's response, going to and fro on the earth. This is very revealing, guys, because it reveals the nature of Satan. It reveals the nature and wisdom that Satan represents. Meaning, Satan, his response, what we read of chapters 1 and 2, the wisdom that Satan has is echoed throughout the whole book through Job's friends. And what I mean by that is that the answer the answer Satan gave to and fro, is the wisdom of Job's friends. That human wisdom goes to and fro and never rests in the fact that true wisdom comes from God. That true wisdom is birthed, if you will, from the presence of the Lord. True wisdom is from God's presence. Godly wisdom doesn't need to go to and fro. It rests in the fact that it comes from God. Does that make sense? So Satan is the figurehead of what we will read from chapters 3 through chapters 37. So in so many ways, guys, and again, I'll say this throughout this teaching, you're more than welcome to disagree with me. That's perfectly fine. But it goes without saying that Job's friends, the wisdom that they give Job, It has the illusion of solution, has an air of truth, the foundation of being right. But I will offer to you guys, because of what they said was not focused on God truly, they offered false wisdom. The right thing at the wrong time is the wrong thing. So what wisdom did you really have by telling a grieving parent that your children are dead and they were sinners? What wisdom in there is that? So when we really look at Job, Satan is a minor character. He's a nothing character. His presence in this story is not worth anything compared to the presence of God. The presence of Satan, zero. The presence of God, so much. In 1 verse 12, we can observe something that's stated. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord in 1 verse 12. Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. So why is this important to note? And if this doesn't make sense, I will clarify if need be. He went out from the presence of the Lord. So what this is truly saying is that yes, it's obvious that Satan entered his presence, but the greatest value for Job was the one place Satan was oblivious to, the presence of the Lord. Does that make sense? Satan entered God's presence, and it says in 1 verse 12, Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. But the greatest value for Job was the one place that Satan was oblivious to, the presence of the Lord. So what we see in Job as a character and as a man is that he is seeking after the who, while his friends are offering him the why. Job is seeking God's presence. And by no means at all does this diminish the suffering that Job went through. Not at all. He suffered a heavy loss, more than I would say anybody in this room could ever understand. The pain and heartache he went through. But we must move on yet again. We must move on to the end of chapter 1. And when we move on, we see 4 of Job's friends. You guys remember reading that? They come up to give him a bad report. Or 4 of his servants, I'm sorry. They specifically say 4 times, repeated 4 times, I alone have escaped to tell you. 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 So, I want you guys to imagine for me, if you will, the turmoil in Job's heart. Imagine this man broken. His 10 kids are dead. His oldest son, who would have taken over the family business, if you will, is dead. And yet he is hearing this complete shock to the system again and again and again. I alone have escaped to tell you. Imagine the tears streaming down Job's face. Imagine the pain and heartache that he is going through. The pain is real and the pain is raw. The suffering, the sorrow, the trial, the tribulation that Job is going through. And you want to know what we don't read in chapter 1? After he hears this 4 times, what we don't read is Job cursing God. What we read is Job turning to God. He falls on his knees and he worships the Lord. In the midst of the craziest storm that Job has probably ever faced, he turns to the Lord. The storms of this world does not take away, does not dictate who created the world. The storms of this life is not bigger than the one who created the world. For Job, that was a reality. For Job, he turned to the Lord. Job was his focus. God was his focus. So Job faced tremendous loss. But his response at the end of chapter 1, I will propose to you guys, is proof unto itself he didn't lose everything. He didn't lose his God. He worships. So for us today, When the storms of life hits us, when the storms of life hit the shores of our hearts, when heartaches come, what will we do? What will we do? Will we turn to the Lord? Will our focus be Yahweh, the amazing and beautiful God that He is? And so as we move on even further, we see that 4 new characters are introduced. We see that Satan no longer speaks. And that, like I just said, these characters take on the wisdom that Satan displayed in chapters 1 and 2. So this first character that we have is Job's wife. She witnessed just as much loss as Job. So I want you guys, for a moment, to try to imagine what it may have been like for Job's wife. She's nameless in this story. But I can almost picture in my mind, I can close my eyes and picture that she sees all this destruction and maybe she puts her hand to her belly. Maybe she's thinking about the first kick of her baby. Maybe she's thinking about when the 4th was born or when the 5th was born. The heart, the crazy intensity of labor. And she's just facing this loss that they're gone now. She went through 9 months of labor 10 times. Dear God, that is insane. The grace on that woman, Lord, have mercy. She must have been besides herself in grief. Yet, she sees Job worshiping and tells him in 2 verse 9, curse God and die. She doesn't grieve with Job. She doesn't cry out for God's presence. She wants her man, her hubby, to curse God. So 2 things are at play here. 1, she speaks to Job out of hurt, and this hurt, I would say, is justified. She faced tremendous loss. Or 2, she believes that Job actually sinned, and that Job, just say you're sorry, right, and tell God you repent. Tell God that you repent. I mean, we're never going to truly know, so I'll leave that open for you guys to wrestle with. But needless to say, she stopped speaking for the rest of the story. Bless you. And she doesn't speak any longer, and there's no evidence of her again, unless you would consider chapter 42 when 10 new kids come by. You can kind of infer that his wife was still around, or Job remarried, but it's up in the air. But moving on from Job's wife, we have 3 other characters. We have Job's 3 friends. So I want you guys to consider this. All that Job went through must have been a scandal. It must have been crazy. It must have shaken their community. Someone in their community, to have all this death surround them, must have committed some grandiose sin. Someone that faced all this death, their livelihood is gone, must have not been coquettish when it came to sin. They just went for it. Job must have did something. So we have Eliphaz the Temanite. And Temanite means own experiences. Eliphaz the Temanite, own experiences. Then we have Bildad the Shuathite. And his name means thinks about past or tradition. Thinks about past and tradition. And then we have Zophar the Naamathite. And his name means authority. Thinks he is full of authority. So we have these 3 friends that gather around Job. Yes.
Will you repeat the meaning of the friends' names a little bit slower, please?
Yes. Am I speaking too fast? Just that moment?
Just with the neat, like,
what they mean?
That brings more understanding to the friends. If you just repeat those so we can get those down, that'd be awesome.
Okay, thank you. Eliphaz the Temanite, his name means own experiences. Bildad the Shuathite, his name means think about the past, or in other words, tradition. And Zophar means thinks he has full, or he's full of authority. The first friend, Eliphaz, his own experiences. Bildad is tradition. And Zophar is authority.
You say thinks he's full of authority? Or?
You can infer that. It's just authority. But it's open for discussion, I suppose. Is there any other questions before we move on and then we take our break? Keep going. We're almost at break time, I see. So, of course, thank you for letting me know. So what you guys read in chapters 1 and 2 is that his friends say nothing for 7 long days. That Job says nothing, that he is mourning his loss. So just maybe this is noble of his friends. Maybe they're letting their friend grieve. And that argument could definitely be made. Or perhaps it was in these 7 days, as they're looking at Job, as he's lying there, perhaps they're thinking to themselves, what did he do to deserve this? What kind of sin or sins or whatever combination you guys can think of, what did he do to deserve this? So it could just be that in the 7 days, his friends had this mindset of what did he do? And perhaps they used these 7 days to come up with the arguments against him, in which we read through chapters 3 through 37. Does that make sense? So before we take our break, I just want to reiterate this one more time. And it's, we have a grieving man. We have a grieving husband and a grieving father. We have a grieving wife and a grieving mother. And we have 3 people, maybe more, who knows, surrounding them, looking on. And because you guys know the rest of the story, what's going to happen? What will they say? So this slide right here is pretty much self-explanatory. The bulk of the story is from chapters 3 through 37. And within this framework of these chapters... Oh, wow. Jesus. Much within this framework of these chapters is we have something called cycles, a cycle of argument. And all that means is simply this, that Job is talking, and then friend 1 talks. Then Job talks again, friend 2 talks, so on and so on. And then when it gets to the end of friend 3, Job speaks again, and it repeats another cycle. Does that make sense? This happens 3 times. And then finally we hit Elihu, who we will talk about that guy at the end of the lecture. But this is the bulk of the story. And a thing that I want to point out for you guys is, did you notice? Did you guys notice that Job is the main one talking? Did you guys see that? He's the main voice. I'm not saying he's the only voice, because that would be a lie and that wouldn't be me being a good teacher. But he is the main voice nonetheless. And as we will explore, Job actually talks to God. Job laments to God. Or in other words, Job is laying bare his emotions, his heart, his feelings. He's just telling God how he feels. And with him doing all of this, Job is seeking the presence of God more than anything else. He's going after the who. He is going after the who in the midst of all the suffering that took place. He's going after that who. So when you guys read Job, And when you read it again and again and again, because I know you guys will, and then when you do another 9-month School of Worship Bible School next year, you'll read Job again 5 times. But when you keep reading Job, you're going to notice that for the most part, Job is talking to God. He is talking to God. He does respond here and there to his friends, but his main focus is talking to God. And you want to know something else? Did you guys notice? His friends never talk to God. They talk about God. There's something peculiar with that. Job talks to God. His friends talk about him. And that, to me, is very indicative of Job's heart posture and his friends' heart posture. His friends never talk to Yahweh. They offer some false theology of suffering, of why there is suffering. But that's not the end. Because we have something else of, did you notice? Did you notice, guys? Did you notice that as one chapter goes from one to the next, and what I mean is chapter 3, chapter 4, so on and so on, as each cycle of argument continued, so on and so on, did you guys notice that the arguments of the friends got smaller and smaller? One friend doesn't even speak in round 3 of arguments. So whoever the author is, I believe, and would dare offer to you guys that this is very intentional. And what this could possibly suggest is that human wisdom is limited in its understanding of suffering. What Job's friends were offering did not quite understand truly what was happening. Human wisdom had nothing of substance to offer what Job was going through. And we see that. Smaller. Homeboy Zophar doesn't even speak. There's only so much you can say when we come from a place of just human wisdom. So could it be, guys, could it be the reason Job speaks so much is because he's chasing after the presence of God? As we will see, Job seeks while his friends do nothing more than cause more anguish and agony for him. It almost seems like his friends are interrupting this intimate dialogue between a suffering man turning to God who can provide that comfort. It almost seems like they're just interrupting that dialogue. They interrupt Job going after the who, while they try to offer a reason why. So, yet again, the scene is set. Round 1, Cycle 1, chapters 3 through 14. As you guys remember, Job sits in agony, in pain, in heartache, in sorrow, in turmoil for 7 long days. So perhaps as he's sitting there, what is going on through his mind? Perhaps as he's sitting there, maybe he's thinking about memories of his children that he's no longer going to see. Can you guys imagine that? As Job is sitting there for hour after hour, boils blood all around him. The laughter of his children are no longer hitting his ears. Perhaps his oldest son would come to him for advice. He's no longer going to hear the voice of his children. So his memories effectively become a prison for him. And he's sitting there in heartache and in turmoil. He's sitting there with deep-seated pain. He sits there silently until 3 verse 11. He states, "Why did I not die at birth, come forth from the womb and expire? Why did I not die at birth, come forth from the womb and expire?" the man speaks. But when he does speak, he speaks out of the depths of his heart. When you guys read this, and when you continue to read it, you're reading the pains of a man who's filled with so much sorrow, he wished he wasn't even born. So much agony, so much anguish. I wish I was never born to experience that sad anguish. I can just imagine his voice being filled with excruciating pain as he sits there and he's just filled with all this grief. It sounds extreme of I wish I was never born, but he laments to God and tells God how he feels. He's telling God exactly what is on his heart, exactly what his heart contains. His emotions were let loose, if you will. The fact of the matter, the bottom line, is that Job is speaking to God. Not his friends, not his wife, not his situation. Job was speaking to God about his situation. He wasn't speaking to his situation about God. He was bringing it to him. This is where I'm at. I wish I was never born. And this is the state of this man. And with that, I have more family testimony. This past summer, I left Kona on outreach to Northeast India, and I was home for a month and a half in a most holy state of California. And it's amazing because In-N-Out is there. But that's besides the point. But last year summer, I was here in Kona just prepping for a wide range of teachings. And in my prep for Leviticus for DBS last year fall quarter and for the SBS last year fall quarter, I was in the office with my good friend John Robinson. He's a great man of God. But I was sitting there with him, and he's doing his prep. He used to be the DBS leader, and he was prepping for the school. And I'm sitting there in my prep, and I get a phone call. And I get a phone call from my Uncle Mike, who's bedridden himself. And he's an invalid, and he can't get up and walk. He can hardly move. He needs heavy assistance. And he's like, Stephen. I'm like, yes. They're like, what's wrong, Uncle Mike? What's going on? And I can tell that his voice was just like, there's an urgency in his voice. And he says that your grandfather fell and is having a stroke. So like he told me, you need, your grandmother already called 911. I need you to call your brothers. And I'm not there. I would have went right away to my grandma, but he's like, call your brothers so you can, so she can have that support, basically. And like this just floored me because I received a phone call from my brother Daniel about an hour later, and he's like, it looks like Grandpa is not going to make it, or he's not going to make tonight. It looks like he's going to die. And I remember hearing in his voice that this reality was setting in. Because for my siblings and I, we've never really had a close death, if you will, that would have like impacted us. And this might have been it. It looks like this was going to be it. And I was just besides myself with like, I'm thousands of miles away from my family. What am I going to do? I can't just hop on a plane and leave, because even if I were to do that, I'll still arrive late, if that makes sense. So I do the only natural thing is like, I love to run, so I decide to run to Magic Sands. And in the midst of just running, I'm sweating like crazy, and I'm crying out to God. And I couldn't stop weeping as I'm just running to Magic Sands. I remember I hit it, I stop, and I walk where the shower areas are at, the bathroom areas, if you guys ever been there. And I just look out to the water, and I just start crying and crying. I'm like, God, you have to show up for my grandpa, please. I start messaging my friend Susie Kim to tell everybody in Taiwan at the time, pray for my grandpa. I message you, Andrew, like tell Terry, pray for my grandpa. I don't want him to die. So in the midst of all this, my emotions were let loose. God, you cannot let him die. God, you cannot let my grandpa die. And in the midst of this lamentation, I just felt this peace hit me. And I ran back to the campus from Magic Sands. And I just waited word. I received word that day that my grandpa was going to make it, but that the stroke, it really took a lot out of him. And to this day, he is alive, thank God. But that near closeness of death, that's a scary thought. And yet, in the midst of this storm that my grandparents were in and that my family was in, we all cried out to God, individually but collectively. Cry out to God. That's what Job did. He's crying out to his God. He's never going to hold his babies anymore. Maybe he has a memory of holding his firstborn son. He's feeling the warmth of that small little body, that tiny heartbeat in his arms. And he's thinking as he's looking at his baby boy, you're gonna inherit everything. You're going to have it all one day. Imagine him thinking about these things that could possibly be going through his mind. No longer a reality because it's not there anymore. So he cries out to his God. But then as we move on to chapter 4 and read about the first response of one of Job's so-called friends. We have Eliphaz. Eliphaz has chosen to speak first, chapter 4. The most revealing words, I would dare say, that sum up Eliphaz is in 4 verse 8. In 4 verse 8 we read, "As I have seen, those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same." Those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. So when we start to read the responses of Job's friends, we must remember the worldview that they are operating from. Good things are happening, that must mean you're great. You're doing well. You're sick right now, brother, that must mean you did a sin in your life. You go to a prayer room right now and repent. The worldview, the lens in which they're viewing this world, remember that, the law of retribution. Eliphaz is making an assumption that the death that befell Job was well deserved. That your children are dead and all that's happened to you is happening because of sin in your life. Eliphaz was doing the opposite a friend should do. Instead of comforting Job, instead of him pointing Job towards God, he was telling Job, it is all your fault. It is all your fault. What we do not read of Job, what you guys can never ever read when you continue to read through the Bible, what you don't read of Eliphaz and the subsequent times when he speaks, and the other friends when they speak, what you don't read is, Job, I'm here for you. I'm here for you. I'm here for you. Instead, what we read is accusation. That even if what they said was true, you just never tell a grieving parent their children are dead because they sinned. That just boggles the mind. You just don't do that. But then Job responds. In 6, verses 24 to 30, he addresses what was spoken about him. And in verse 25 of chapter 6, Job lets out this powerful, powerful statement. And he says this, 6 verse 25. How forceful are honest words. How forceful are honest words. As a parent racked by grief, the word just given to him was anything but honest. When he was just spoken to by Eliphaz, it's just, good God, Imagine the stinging nature of those words when it hit him. Imagine what that would have done to his heart. Imagine how Job was feeling. And then even as we move on in chapter 7, in 7 verse 11, we read this repeated phrase, I will. In it, Job is remarking to God how his heart needs to tell God all that he feels. All the raw emotions marinating his heart. And then finally in 7 verse 20, Job lets out this conditional statement. In verse 20, he states, if I sin. So Job still believes he did nothing wrong. He perhaps doesn't know yet. He doesn't know what's going on. So if I sin, then Lord, tell me what I need to do. If I sin. And if he did sin, why was he a target by God? Why did his children have to die? Why did his babies have to die? And as we move on from this place, we arrive at the halfway point of the first round of speeches. And as we consider, guys, this first round of speeches, we have to take a step back and note something. We have to take a step back and see that Job's friends believed in what they were telling him. The tone of what they were communicating seems like they expected Job to agree with them. It just seems that way. Little did they know, this suffering servant actually had a relationship with God. His responses make the friends bewildered that Job didn't agree. But then Bildad. We got to talk about Bildad. Bildad makes the most hurtful statement in history. This statement was what a father did not need to hear. In 8 verses 4 through 5, he states, if your children sin against him, he deliver them from the power of their transgression, if you will seek God. Did Bildad not know that that's exactly what Job was doing? He was seeking God. Bildad doesn't blame Job for his children's death, but he takes it out on his dead children. Job, it's not your fault that your children are dead, but it's their fault that they're dead. They did something. And again, guys, this must have been a stinging wound. It must have hurt Job immensely. He was a father that lost his beloved children. He did not need to hear, your children are sinners. He did not need to hear, your children are gone because they deserved it. What's more was that Bildad makes this ironic statement, and it's just, if you will seek God. Job was on a lonely odyssey going after the who. And then him going after the who, his friends up until this point was offering a why. So as we take a step back today, and we are comforting a friend, sometimes the best thing to do is to remain silent and just be there and be present. Sometimes it's putting your arm around that grieving person saying, I'm with you. We do not read out of his friends at all. We do not read 1 ounce of comfort from them at all. And in fact, you guys already know it, they accuse Job. But then finally, Zophar speaks in chapter 11. Like the other two, it seems Zophar is floored that Job has not repented for all the disaster. Nothing captures his heart of stone more than verse 6. Zophar says this, 11 verse 6. Know then God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves. I'm going to repeat that verse one more time. Know then, God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves. Do you guys see the audacity of that statement? He is basically telling Job that his suffering should be more. You are telling a grieving dad that his children's death was not only deserved, but that your suffering on top of the suffering of losing your children should be more. The audacity and gall of Zophar. And again, we do not read of Zophar. I'm with you, Job. And his heartache and turmoil, I'm with you. Come, let's pray together. We don't read this. We don't read this of his character at all. I'm not a parent. I will be in the future in Jesus' name. But I can only imagine what greater loss is there than losing your child. All the hopes and dreams gone. Job, that poor soul. The grief at this point must have been just overwhelming, just hearing these attacks again and again and again. And then, as we move on, we see in chapters 12 through 14, Job very slightly addresses Zophar, but again, guys, he has this upward focus in the midst of his suffering. Within these chapters, read about many personal pronouns that Job uses. And in 13 verse 15, read this powerful, beautiful verse. Though he slays me, I will hope in him. Yet I will argue my ways to his face. And I'd say that this 13:15 sums up the first round of arguments. It sums up the heart cry of Job. Perhaps Job is saying that no matter the fact that God slays him, he still wants his presence. He needs to be comforted. He wants to argue his case with God himself and not argue with his friends. Job wants God. Job needs God. And his friends keep interrupting him and telling him, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And finally, we have round 2 of arguments from chapters 15 to 21. And as we take a step back once more, we notice that Job is lamenting. He's being interrupted by his friends. But out of the 7 chapters in the second round that Job is speaking, out of the 7 chapters, Job speaks for 4 of them, and his friends just interrupt the rest. And so, I bring this up because just to drill it into you guys, his friends are interrupting him, seeking after the presence of God. And even as Eliphaz speaks for the second time, we notice that there's this difference. There's a difference in veracity in his language. It seems to have intensified even more. His language is harsher, is where I'm getting at. In 15 verses 3 to 4 it states, should they argue in unprofitable talk, or in words with which they can do no good? But you are doing away with the fear of God and hindering meditation before God. This is being said to Job. You are doing away with the fear of God and hindering meditation before God. So it's like fear of the Lord is wisdom, and wisdom is fear of the Lord. And wisdom comes from where? The presence of the Lord. So the irony in the statement that's being stated and directed at this man. They're failing to realize that he is doing what a person in grief just needs to express. This degrading remark solidifies even more that he is bewildered. Eliphaz is bewildered that Job is not repenting. Because up until this point, we don't see Job saying sorry for the slights that they perceive. He's essentially telling Job that he lacks fear of the Lord. So for 2 chapters after 15, Job addresses his friends but continues to cry out to God. In 16 verse 2, Job tells his friends that they are miserable comforters. Thank you, Job, for telling it like it is. Those so-called friends are miserable comforters. Every word spoken by Job's friends caused more grief and hurt and pain and sorrow than he was already dealing with. And then we have what we are left with as we move on to Bildad speaking within the second cycle of argument, is a lack of comfort. We don't see that in his character or in the other characters of the friends. We don't see, I'm with you. When my grandfather nearly died, when I messaged you, Andrew, you didn't message me, oh, your grandfather may die because he sinned. You comforted me. So we don't see this in his friends. There's some sort of disconnect. Even if Job was wrong 100%, it goes back to perhaps the right thing said at the wrong time is the wrong thing. And then it happens, guys. In chapter 19, Job responds in such a beautiful and profound way that captures the second round of him speaking. In 19 verse 25, he majestically and beautifully and wonderfully states, "For I know that my Redeemer lives, and that at the last he will stand upon the earth." What is profound about this statement is the place in which he's stating this. In the midst of all this pain and hurt, perhaps he's shaking with pain beyond words. Perhaps physically it's just pus and all this, like blood is just oozing out of him. Tears streaming down burning hot cheeks. The weight of grief pressing down on him, alienated by those around him, his wife sitting there next to him silently mourning. He states and hopes against hope that one day a Redeemer will live that will vindicate him. Job, we see by this one statement alone, was yearning for the presence of God. He was looking for the presence, the only presence that can give him the comfort that he needed. What he needed was not, you're a sinner. What he needed was, I'm with you. And in the midst of this profound oration by Job, Zophar speaks again for the second time in chapter 20. And you guys want to know what Zophar said? You already read it. In 20 verse 29, we hear this words of no comfort or wisdom that states, "This is the portion of the wicked from God, the heritage decreed for them by God." Like, are you kidding me, Zophar? Why not just put your arm around Job? Why not comfort him? Why keep telling him why he's suffering? This misguided man, Zophar, with his one statement, captures the very heart of the law of retribution. Bad things happen because you are a sinner. He failed to realize that life is more complex than that. The complexities of this life, of the sufferings and tragedies of this world, cannot be explained in a way Zophar was perpetuating. Job speaks again, and then the second round ends in chapter 21. Entering the last round. And we are moving quite along. And as we move on yet again, we arrive at the final onslaught of speeches. In chapter 22, Eliphaz speaks for the third and final time. In 22, verses 23 to 25, we read a series of conditional statements by Eliphaz that captures his dialogue with Job very well. Essentially, Eliphaz gave steps or actions for Job to have right relationship with God. Did he not know what Job was doing was indicative of a relationship with God unto itself? He's crying out to him. Eliphaz, he is mourning. He is lamenting. He needed to be there for his friend. And he wasn't. But then Job does speak again from chapters 23 to 24. And whenever you guys read Job again in the future, notice the atmosphere. And to give more clarity on what I mean by that, notice the tone. And to give more clarity on what I just said, just when we read Job, it's not like a happy-go-lucky words that you're reading. This man is going through an immense grief of a magnitude that I can never, ever grasp. So up until this point, Job has been in a pressure cooker of emotions of sorts. He has highs and lows. His loss cannot truly be ever we cannot truly comprehend it. His words at this point must have just been boiling over. He's just ready to snap. And then in 23 verse 4 he states this: I would lay my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. 23 verse 4 Job states that. This statement immensely reveals the condition of Job's heart. He has lamented to God while dealing with the dumb grumblings of his friends. His friends were possessed by the spirit of dumb and should not speak. And they just kept on talking. So they completely embody the spirit of dumb that was released in the world in Genesis chapter 3. So what we have here is that he has lamented to God and he wants audience with God. Job wants to tell God, speak to me. Speak to me. God, where are you? My children are dead. My flocks are gone. I have nothing, Lord. Where are you? He wants audience with the creator of it all. He is crying out to the creator of it all. The same creator that gave the Abrahamic covenant, Genesis 12-17. This very same creator. Where are you? Where are you? Where are you? I need you, Lord. I need you. Job wanted God nonetheless, no matter his words. Now, teaching this book, I'm not going to defend and say everything that Job spoke was pretty and nice, because they're anything but. Suffice it to say, he wanted God nonetheless. Where are you? Where are you? And in the midst of Job wanting his audience, good Lord have mercy. We have Bildad the Shuhite. He speaks for the last time. Bildad, please don't talk. But he speaks again, and this is the shortest chapter in this book. In 25 verse 4 he states, how then can a mortal be righteous before God? How can one born of a woman be pure? So this rhetorical question perhaps was meant to degrade Job further. With his last-ditch effort, Bildad wanted to tear down all that Job has said. This in turn meant that Bildad did not understand in any moment that the best response to suffering was the heart of the person to pursue after its maker. When those time hits, turn to God. When those time hits, turn to God. And with these last round of speeches, and with Job speaking in chapter 27. These speeches was, up until this point, up until chapter 27, was about a man talking to God, and he just wants audience with him. There were many moments for sure when Job said really harsh things. Many moments when he didn't. His friends were a different story. They criticized him and wanted him to agree with their limited human wisdom. Not once, as we hopefully saw, did they do right by Job. Well, I shouldn't say that. The only right thing the three friends did was not speaking again. That was a good thing that they did. They didn't speak, so I commend them for it. But other than that, they really didn't do right by him. So we have endured 25 chapters of not taking a breath. And now the more that you guys study this book, the more you read it in this school, outside of the school, what you stay in YM, outside YM, it doesn't. We all love the Lord here. But the more you read it, it's 25 chapters of just constantly running. It's almost like we need as readers a breath of fresh air. Because it's like, good God, we just hear these laments, or complaints, laments, and we just hear these accusations. It's like, good God, I need to breathe. And we have that in chapter 28. In chapter 28, we breathe a little. We have that. We have the poem on wisdom. Seek wisdom. What we have in chapter 28 is completely different than what came before and different than what follows it, what comes next. In all its glory, this refreshing poem on wisdom, and some points of view held by some, was that it was added later and that Job didn't speak this out. And the reason why some would hold this point of view is that it's just different than what Job says previously. It's just different. The tone seems different. Everything seems different. That perhaps a later compiler just added that in there because it would have been great. And that it was added to this book to make some grand theological point for the book of Job. But if we take a deep breath, these words said by Job perhaps came from him. Perhaps came from him because fear of the Lord is wisdom. Wisdom comes from the presence of the Lord. And this man was seeking after that said presence. So it would, to me, make sense that there would be such a chapter of just wisdom. That perhaps at this point, Job is just like, he just needs to express it. All that's been going on, this is where wisdom is found. This is wisdom. So where can man go to find wisdom? What is the source of wisdom? We have that in 28 verse 28. And it states, and he said to humankind, truly the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. This is profound in many, 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 many levels. And before I say what those levels are, Daniel, did you say a break at 11? How long? 5-minute break, so 11:06. And he said to humankind, truly the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. 28 verse 28. Do you guys have any questions up until this point of the teaching? Or any rebukes that I may need? What'd you say? Who are the Nephilim? I don't know who they are. Nate does.
We don't have time for other rebukes.
What the heck? Okay.
Leviathan's a dinosaur. Sorry.
Oh, we're getting to that actually in like a few minutes. So when Job states this in 28 verse 28, with all that he said, it's powerful on many levels. When you read of 28 verse 28, truly the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. Could it be by Job saying this is, yes, he's saying this profound statement, but could it also be he may have been describing what his friends lacked all along? Maybe they did not have the fear of the Lord and have understanding. Remember what Job just faced. 1, his friends said in so many words he was a sinner. 2, his friends tried to quench Job's thirst for the presence of God, or in other words, his pursuit of who? 3, his friends said that he deserved what happened to him because of all that sin he did not repent of. Remember, his friends said all they said to Job because of their idea of wisdom. So the bottom line is the worldly wisdom rooted in a law of retribution displayed by his friends was not real wisdom because it lacked fear of the Lord. And we move on with 31 verse 40. The words of Job are ended. That's a powerful statement. In my own subjective opinion, it's my favorite verse in Job. Favorite verse in Job because, read again, the words of Job are ended. Think of all that's behind those words. Maybe his words are ended because he just couldn't speak anymore. He's been through enough. He's been through a lot of pain and sorrow and turmoil and trials and tribulation. He has faced a lot. He has heard a lot. And his words are ended. Maybe he stopped talking because the memories of his kids flashed through his mind yet again. His words became no more because just maybe his heart was overwhelmed. His heart was racked with grief. And then we have good old Elihu, or maybe bad old Elihu, or does it even matter, Elihu? From chapters 32 to 37, another person speaks, the fourth friend. Reading these chapters, you guys could be asking this, and it's almost expected when you read Job to ask this. Who was Elihu? Where did he come from? Was he more righteous than the rest of his friends? And why, as we will soon discover, did God not rebuke him with the rest of the friends? So I raise these questions up, not because I have the answers. I raise them up for you guys to wrestle with. What I do want to offer when it comes to Elihu is just, was he good? Was he bad? And there's no right or wrong answer. But with a show of hands, how many of you guys think what Elihu said was good? Nobody? Okay. I mean, there's no, like I said, there's no wrong answer. There really isn't. For a show of hands, who thinks what he said was bad? And the rest are, can't wait to read Leviticus. God bless you guys. That's what it is, I know you guys are just thinking about 27 chapters of the most beautiful words ever. But anyways, we're in Job. So to say it outright, those of you guys who say he's good or bad, I tend to lean towards more of what he said wasn't good. I say that because in his words are a lack of empathy. The same thing I see in the other three friends, I see in Elihu. But then there's this wrestling match within me whenever I teach this book and whenever I read through Job and whenever I consider it, it's just God doesn't rebuke him. That, to me, I can't ignore that, that can't be ignored. And I don't know why. But nonetheless, perhaps the whole time Elihu is waiting for his chance to speak, and then he finally gets his chance. He finally gets the chance that he has been waiting for. And he speaks. And he finally speaks. And he speaks for verse after verse, sentence after sentence, chapter after chapter. And this fourth friend finally gives his last words in 37. And then it happens, guys. He's here. He finally happens. We arrive at the moment we've all been waiting for. We've arrived at the moment Job and his friends have been waiting for. Chapter after chapter, one person talks, then another. Advice was given. Tears were shed. Memories of tragic loss assaulted a man and his wife. Pain gripped the air. Whether talking to God or about him, God was the subject. Perhaps Job expected God to come down on clouds, clean up his wounds, answer his questions of why, while at the same time rebuking his friends. But then conversely, perhaps Job's friends thought God wouldn't take it any longer, couldn't take the wicked heart of Job. And that God would salute them, the friends, for saying what was right. But that doesn't happen, does it? To sum up what God says, the answer to suffering is God himself. Turn to me. When God shows up to set the record straight, it provides with 3 chapters of climax of this book. And God corrects the thinking of both Job and his friends. Job passed the test, not because his theology was correct, but because he did not reject God, even when his theology told him he should. Despite all that Job said, his heart remained honest with God. And God answers Job with himself. This is the wisdom that answers the question of suffering. Not to answer to the why I have to suffer, but where does my hope rest in the midst of suffering? The voice speaks out of the whirlwind. In 38 verse 8, God says this. Or, who shut in the sea with the doors when it bursts out of the womb? 38 verse 22. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow, or have seen the storehouses of the hail? Interesting, God. 39 verse 1. Do you know when the mountain goat gives birth? 39 verse 19. Did you give the horse its might? Did you make it leap like the locust? 39 verse 26. Is it by your wisdom that the hawk soars in the sky and spreads its wings toward the south? What we have here is God not addressing at all why Job suffered. Nothing satisfies more than the presence of God. So perhaps God was taking Job on this cosmic tour of creation, of the universe, if that makes sense. And that I am bigger, Job. I am with you. That every detail, Job, belongs to me. And if that wasn't enough in this whirlwind experience, we have this interesting passage of Behemoth and Leviathan. So taking a first look at this mystical creature, Behemoth. Is it a dinosaur? How many people... Joey. Oh, God. How many people think that Behemoth was a dinosaur? You guys for real? Oh, man. Like I mentioned in the beginning, we have to keep in mind the poetic language in mind when you read Job. And we have to keep in mind exaggeration. That the details given could possibly fit like a hippopotamus, some scholars would say. And that Leviathan could possibly fit the description of a crocodile. But suffice it to say, whether we agree with this or this, we have to keep in mind context. Would Job have seen these things? It remains to be seen. But we must keep in mind the point that God is trying to make. That despite the power and might of these fantastic creatures, dinosaur or not, the point is this: I rule over them. Every detail belongs to me. So are they or are not they? It is what it is.
Why do we think them to be physical?
Physical?
Yeah, couldn't they be spiritual?
So the question was, why do we think they're physical? Could they be spiritual? There definitely is that school of thought. That, well, for one, I didn't mention this at the beginning because there's no time. But some would say that Job was fiction and that it didn't happen and that what we read is not like history. It's meant to serve a point, you know what I mean? Not taking that part away, it's just that it's fiction. So in that regard, that point of view could definitely be held. Can it be spiritual? Even if we believe that Job is an historical figure, which I can tell you guys after break or if you see me on campus, I tend to lean towards that point of view. But I definitely could see that there could be spiritual meanings behind these things. I won't rule that out. Yeah. So I'll say it's a possibility. Yeah. So we have this cosmic tour that Job is on. But there's something else that I want to point out to you guys as we move on from this point. That there's this observation we can make when we read the Bible in every book. Sometimes it can be just in a chapter or in a cluster of verses or a whole book of the Bible itself. And there's this observation called beginning and ending. That it begins a certain way and ends a certain way to serve a point. Now, I share that because the greatest character in the beginning of this book is God. The greatest character at the end of this book is God. And in the middle, I'm not diminishing the suffering Job went through. The suffering was real. But in the middle is the story of a man who suffers. So this suggests possibly that he is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and again, the first and the last, that there will be an end to suffering. There will be an end to human suffering. That history is going to a place. Suffering will not be long-lasting. It will end. God is absolutely good. God is good. So that no matter what we go through in life, no matter the hardships, we have God with us during suffering. And with that, we arrive at the end of Job with chapter 42. We have Job repent, and this is another kind of hurts your brain type of a deal. And I still don't know what to think of it. I won't lie to you guys. Where Job repents, and yet God commands Job of being right. Did you catch that? In chapter 42, he tells, I believe it's Eliphaz, God is speaking to Eliphaz, have my servant Job pray for you for what he has spoken what is right of me. But then just 2 chapters previous, Job repents. So it's how does that work? But nonetheless, we've arrived at the finish line. We've arrived at the end. And to set the scene, we have Job. He is blessed with a new set of children to the 4th generation. He's an older man at this point. I want you guys to picture this, really picture this. Imagine that you're Job. You face this horrible loss, this horrible suffering, and this horrible pain. You sit silent for 7 days, however long the dialogue between him and his friends. It could have been an hour, it could have been a few days, it could have been a few weeks. Nonetheless, it takes place. God speaks out of the world, and at the end of this, you as Job get older and older and older and older. Your children has grandchildren. Your child has a grandchild, and that grandchild has a great-grandchild, and a great-grandchild has a great-great. You're an old man. Perhaps you're sitting in an ancient rocking chair in an ancient part of the world. Maybe you're cutting up an apple and you're eating an apple. And maybe you're sitting there and you just see your great-great-grandchildren and you see the family beside you. Maybe you feel that slow whisper of a wind come across your arms. And what do you do in that moment? Maybe that wind reminds you of the whirlwind experience. And the laughter you hear perhaps reminds you of the children that you initially lost so many years ago. And in that moment, you still have the choice. Do you worship God or not? Job goes after the who. God was ultimately the 5th friend that Job needed. The ultimate friend that he needed. The friend that opened his eyes of his heart to understand and bring his presence for him. God was a friend of Job. His question as to why was not answered. Not at all. But the illumination as to the who was revealed. God himself. Job was a suffering servant for God. Can we all agree on that? He was a suffering servant for God. Little did this Job know, thousands of years later, the same God would come down and be a suffering servant for him and for all the Jobs of humanity. And what we have in the form of the cross, the blood-splattered cross, is that Jesus is well acquainted with suffering. That no matter the heartache of life, no matter the pains and sorrow, Jesus knows what that is. I could almost just picture just seeing Jesus, my precious Jesus, being nailed to a tree for 6 long, grueling hours after being beaten to a pulp, with his back filled with lacerations and blood squirting everywhere. A crown of thorns, some would say the thorns were 1 inch long, so they punctured his skull cap as it was placed on his head. I can almost imagine just maybe one of the thoughts of the Savior. Of course, I can't prove this, but just maybe one of the thoughts going on through his mind is just for all the Jobs of humanity. For all the suffering that there is of the world, we have a Savior. We have the only God that knows what suffering is like. We have the only God who's well acquainted with grief. The pain that Jesus went through, the rejection that Jesus Christ went through. We have this in Him. On that cross, Jesus embraced that suffering. This is the answer, Job. This is it. This is it. In Jesus, we have it all. So no matter what we face in life, we can turn to the one who knows what it's like. There is no suffering of this world that's bigger than the presence of God. The presence of God is bigger than any suffering we face. And that is not diminishing suffering. It is not. What it's saying is that God is bigger. God is absolutely bigger. And He did that for you and me. So let that sink in, guys. The passion of Job was a prophetic window glimpse of the passion of Christ. No matter what, turn to Him. No matter what, turn to God. And with that, I want to bring it back to the beginning of this lecture, my family testimony. And is it still recording, Daniel? Can you turn it off?